As long as I'm President of the United States, Iran will never be allowed to have a nuclear weapon.
All right, so joining us now is the director of the Iran Project at the International Crisis Group, Ali Vaez, along with Heritage Senior Research Fellow Lieutenant Colonel Dakota Wood. And Ali, I want to start with you. We just heard from President Trump in what he said this morning. And his opening line there, very interesting. What do you make about the pressure that he's placing back on Iran?
Well, I think it's a good sign that the president decided not to further escalate, and in response to the off-ramp that the Iranians offered with their retaliatory measure last night, which basically resulted in no American casualties and fatalities, to draw a line under this confrontation so far. But what one has to remember, the president also doubled down on the maximum pressure policy, which is the root cause of the current tensions between Iran and the U.S. So I think we're only buying time until the next confrontation between the two countries.
Well, what's interesting is when we talk about confrontation, President Donald Trump did at least point to the prospect of peace to wrap up his speech. I want to play what he said and get your guys' reaction on the other side. Take a listen.
I want you to have a future, and a great future, one that you deserve, one of prosperity at home and harmony with the nations of the world. The United States is ready to embrace peace with all who seek it.
All right, so Lieutenant Colonel, I mean, you just heard the president there. I mean, there seems to be at least a push for hope when he was addressing the people of Iran, saying that he does hope for a better future and the one you deserve. What do you make of that, and how we could potentially get there if people get what they actually want to see in the Middle East? Your take.
Well, I think it's a continuity of 40 years of U.S. policy with respect to Iran, that we want to see a peaceful region. We want to see somebody who contributes to the global economy, who doesn't support terrorism. I mean, the evidence is overwhelmingly incontrovertible in terms of Iranian support to groups that have used terrorism and violence to impose their will on other people. So that's been a consistent U.S. message, and I think President Trump is very much in line with previous administrations. Where he differs is actually taking action against key people who have been at the heart of fomenting this kind of instability and providing funding, materials, weapons, training, and support to groups that seek the overthrow of other countries, like Hezbollah, constantly attacking Israel. Hamas has not been helpful. Houthi rebels, it kind of goes on and on. Not to mention the attacks on U.S. personnel, again, across decades, most recently, obviously, here in the last week. So I think Iran has been put on notice by President Trump that his administration is not going to tolerate the sort of behavior we've seen for 4 decades.
Gentlemen, Nan Hayworth here, and one of our previous guests, Hussein Amir Ahmadi of the American-Iranian Council, made a striking assertion that actually the theocracy, the mullahs, wanted to see Soleimani eliminated, and that therefore there might be some element of cooperation in some way, or at least a harmonization. That's a striking assertion. What do you think, and could that have some validity, and what would that mean for a peace process?
Well, I mean, I guess I'll jump on that myself. I
Sure,
mean,
go ahead.
There is this idea that there are these monolithic authoritarian centers in many countries, and that's just not the case. Every country, every regime has dissension, has friction, has opportunists in there. So I'm not aware of any facts that came out that would support that assertion, but I wouldn't be surprised if the number 2 guy in Iran had become too popular, right, for the Ayatollah. So I don't dismiss that, but I haven't heard any evidence that would support that sort of an assertion.
And Ali, real quick, your follow-up to that question.
I really think that amounts to a conspiracy theory. General Soleimani was Iran's most effective military leader for advancing Iran's regional policy. There's no evidence whatsoever over the years that he was insubordinate to the supreme leader. So I really don't buy into that theory at all.
So, Ali, you were saying that a possible flare-up and escalation in tensions could still happen. So what do you think that's actually going to look like? Is it because President Trump is still putting additional economic sanctions on Iran?
Look, 3 years ago, we didn't have Iranian missile strikes on U.S. military bases. We didn't have Iranians targeting shipping in the Persian Gulf. We didn't have Iranians basically targeting oil infrastructure in Saudi Arabia. all of this, the original sin was committed by the Trump administration when it decided to withdraw from the nuclear deal unilaterally and also impose sanctions on Iran. So again, the underpinning issue here has not changed, and as long as that continues, the pattern that we have seen in the past 6 months, which has brought us 3 times to the brink of a military confrontation with Iran after the shoot down of the drone, after the attack on Saudi Aramco, and this time with the assassination of General Soleimani, will continue. As long as the president sticks to his maximum pressure policy and doesn't decide to opt for real diplomacy with people who are not seeking regime change in Iran, but who are willing to come to a mutually beneficial deal with the existing Iranian regime, I think this situation continues at the risk of putting the entire region on fire.
Yeah, Lieutenant Colonel, just to follow up on that, I mean, when we look at the latest Reuters Ipsos poll of about 60-40, the split between Americans who are disapproving of Donald Trump's handling of the Iranian situation so far, I mean, when we move forward from here, if he is serious about the proposal for peace, how does that really stack up against what Iran's pushing for here in terms of the removal of foreign troops from the region altogether? I mean, how do you get both of those things handled here as, again, pressure here, I guess, in terms of the way that Americans are thinking about it, might want to see some sort of change?
Well, I mean, I always resist speaking for the American people. I mean, I can't talk to 300 million folks, but I think it is a fact that we don't immerse ourselves in history. And again, the last comment that was made there about things not happening until the current president came into office ignores 40 years of history where we've seen the Iranian regime attacking and killing American citizens, being behind the bombing of the barracks in Beirut back in the 1980s. I mean, again, you know, the historical record is incontrovertible. So we finally have somebody who says we're just not going to tolerate that sort of thing, right? The president does not want a war, especially going into a presidential election cycle here in the United States, but he also can't turn a blind eye to the disruption that Iran has caused with global energy markets, their support to various terror groups in Syria, the mess that is occurring in Yemen as well. So I think the American people actually look to somebody who's decisive. I think the president was very blunt in placing blame with the previous administration. It freed up $150 billion worth of money that wasn't used to improve quality of life in Iran. It was actually used to support various terror groups across the region. So I think that kind of decisive action, the muted response by Iran with its overnight missile strike, where it could have done so many other things, I think it actually held back because it feared a counterstrike of the United States, which just wields enormous military power, which we have not used in the region here of late.
All right, well, this issue will continue to be one we're talking about, so we'll have to have you gentlemen back to continue the conversation. But for now, Ali Vaez and Lieutenant Colonel Dakota Wood, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.